We move voluntarily to feel good, we move to get stronger, we move for peace of mind, and some of us move involuntarily, repeatedly. Hello and welcome to TickFit the podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things movement in both the exercise sphere and in life with Tourette syndrome. This is a platform to discuss Tourette syndrome and its effects on our bodies. We'll speak with movement professionals where we can advocate and educate about Tourette syndrome, while the Tourette community can benefit from the expertise of these individuals. We'll also speak with professionals about Tourette syndrome and other tic disorders. I'm your host, Raquel Cunningham, and I've been on a quest for the past 2 decades to discover the connection between movement, exercise, and our ticking muscles. This is not meant to diagnose or treat Tourette syndrome. There is no cure for Tourette syndrome. We are here to advocate and educate about Tourette through conversation, and anything in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Please always consult with your doctor before beginning any exercise program to make sure that it's right for you. Welcome, everybody. I am super excited to have my good friend here, Ronald Gonzales-Trujillo. Ron has been training since 2012 and has a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Physiology from Cal State San Bernardino. He has worked in several fields within the health and fitness world, from physical therapy clinics, personal and group training, collegiate strength and conditioning, bodybuilding prep, and produced educational content with KIPS, the Kinesiology Institute for Performance Specialists. This is going to be great. He's also an actor, having appeared in Cassandra, Your Name Matters, Escape Party, and has 2 upcoming projects being released soon called Finding Figures and Horseplay, in which he stars in. So, Ron, thank you for being here. I'm super excited to get into this today.
Thank you for having me. We've been talking about it for a while, so I'm glad we're finally able to get it on the books.
Definitely. So tell me, what got you into training?
Actually, acting got me into training in a way. So I had always had a real interest in physical sciences and in anatomy, and I initially wanted really badly to be a surgeon.
Really? I actually didn't know that about you.
Yeah. So I started school with a pre-med track, and that was the plan, was go to medical school, be a surgeon. But it was twofold that got me out of that. One was having to imagine telling so many people that their grandpa died at my hands. I was like, that's going to be tough. And the other one is I have always had an interest in acting growing up. And I realized, with residency in medical school, I wouldn't have any spare time to even attempt to pursue that until, now, essentially. So I was like, well, what's something along those lines that still interests me and involves, anatomy in the human body, and I could still help people? And I've always been big into weightlifting and, playing sports growing up. So I was like, let's combine those interests. And also, now I can set my own schedule and have the time I've been pursuing acting for a few years now, and allowed me all the time I wanted.
It's awesome. See, look at that. I already learned 2 new things about you that I didn't know. We've been training alongside each other for several years.
Right.
Awesome.
Well, it's hard. Those pesky clients always want our attention. It's like, dude, we're trying to talk.
All about that. Come on now. We're there to have fun and move.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm super excited to have this conversation today because both professionally and personally how to move and program towards a goal, right? And now know even that depth of you, that it was pre-med that kind of led you into that too. But I wanted to talk about programming towards a goal and how do you program to not do something? When it comes to tics, the goal is to reduce tics. We know we can't take them away, but how do you program to not do something? Which also kind of leads into what the gold standard is for Tourette treatment, CBIT, Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics. And there's a lot of different parts to it. There's awareness training, there's a tic hierarchy, but a big part is finding a competing response, which is looking at the opposing muscle to that premonitory urge. But now the competing response has to be able to be done anywhere. If you're in school, if you're in class, if you're in a meeting, something like this even. And if we do bigger movements, you can't always do that in a meeting.
Yeah.
But the idea of training those muscles so that your competing response, you might have more connection to. So I'm excited to kind of nerd out on anatomy with you today.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think exactly what you talked about. I actually learned the most about CBIT and about this type of work through you. So it's fun to actually pick your brain here. But it kind of goes to what they talk about in, like sports psychology and any type of performance-based psychology. You don't focus on what you don't want to happen, right? It's a competing response. So we focus on what we do want.
Totally.
We program toward the competing response. So like if somebody, as you said, you get a better connection to your body. So even if their ideal competing response would be like a lat pull down, right? It can't just be like, hold on, guys, I'm having a moment. I need to go do some pull. But if you are composed and you have that kinesthetic awareness, you could, I can hit a lat spread right now. It looks a little weird, but if I can do a lat spread, I can contract one lat or the other, and it looks, you see it a bit, but it's not as big as the full exercise-based competing response, but it can still have a similar outcome, right? Just
Absolutely.
Stimulus.
Or even that can last then. What is the longevity of doing that lat spread? And then, how long can that feeling last? Will that get you through the meeting? Will that get you through your school test? Will that get you through whatever social interaction that you as the person are trying to navigate and get through?
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
And with something that minute too, or, any type of muscular contraction that you can do it a few times, you can hold it until you have a cessation of the feeling, the need to tick, and then, bring it back when you need it. So
it's so true. And I'd heard somewhere recently too, just being able to isolate your lats, without a load is actually really, really difficult. Yeah. So the need for training is huge to actually engage the lat, to get your shoulders to depress, it's trickier than people think.
Yeah, definitely. That's like one of the very few times in one-on-one training where I would advocate for touching your client. Like, obviously ask their personal comfort level.
For sure.
But for most things, some people will be too handsy or too hands-on. But for that is one of the few times where a lot of people kind of need some, external proprioceptive cues to be like, this is that spot. This is where we're trying to activate. It's not just scapular retraction.
Right. Which is what everybody goes for.
Like, yeah. Like, I can retract, but can you depress? Can you elevate? Can you protract one at a time?
Well, the crazy thing too, like you don't get to see your back. You can't see it. You can see your bicep. You can see your quad. You can see your knees, your ankles, your abdomen, all of that, but you can't see your back. So you have no idea what your rhomboids, what your traps, what your lats are doing.
Exactly. And unless someone is already well developed back there or has a knowledge base of anatomy, they don't even realize how many muscle groups make up your back. They think it's my back. Like your chest is one, right?
Right.
And then your day-to-day activities, how often are people doing a row or a pull down or, a rear delt fly? It's like a lot of stuff we do is in front of us because, like you said, that's where you can see. I'm not doing work back here because that would be strange. I almost knocked over my void trying to do it.
I almost knocked over my void. That's the first banger of the day.
It goes on forever. Just ignore the shadow.
Oh man. Yeah. It's funny. When we first started working at the same gym together, I could see right away that you could train the spectrum. You could train athletes, you could train the general public, you could train guys that were looking for hypertrophy. And so that's how I knew you were an incredibly well-rounded trainer, even before really talking about everything. But I could also see that you had tics. And so I came to you and I was like, I have this lifelong project. I have tics. And this is something that I've been trying to do to make. And there's so many ideas to come together within this. You were an incredible sounding board for many reasons. First and foremost, that it didn't have to be perfect to just make it exist first. Just get it out there, make it live. And then like, here we are, look at the fruition of it. We actually get to talk about, this back and forth of like, you get it, I get it. Let's do it. But yeah, so let's get into some movements here. I always like to overcomplicate things because I think just how my brain works, but also in kind of training something beyond what would just satisfy the competing response muscles, the antagonistic muscles to your ticking muscles, to train beyond that, I think is the world of self-awareness that's also involved in CBIT. How do you progress towards something? How do you continue training and build up to something, like you were saying, like a lat pull, to a pull up, a lat pull could suffice, but what if you work up to a pull up? Like, what is that whole process? And that's where the fun part of training is, because it's
Yeah.
what's the person's athletic ability? What's the person's body build? What do they like to do? What do they want to do?
Yeah.
But so I'm gonna let you call it. Do we want to talk about tricep dips first or hinges?
Let's talk hinges.
Let's go hinge. Let's
Reason
keep it
being,
simple.
I would say that's, a bigger, more primary movement that you kind of need to be able to do. And I would say as long as the person were ambulatory,
Yep.
they can do it. Whereas some people might not. There's some injuries that would preclude tricep dips more frequently than would preclude a hinge. But
That's why
people
I went for that one first too, because with so many shoulder tics are so anteriorly based, they're so forward based. And so the idea of how would you ever build up, or why would you want to for a tricep dip? Because you would have to clear all of these other paths to get there. But anyways, we'll get to that complexity soon.
And clearing those paths, to jump forward, spoiler, clearing those paths is a worthwhile goal in and of itself. There is, so Mark Bell always says, strength is never a weakness. Like there's no downside to getting strong
Right.
at this stuff, and
Right.
then you learn yourself. Anyway, circling back.
But there's so much to get into. Okay, so let's talk about a hinge. It's one of the primary movement patterns. It's predominantly a hip-based pattern, and it's everything, right? When you do a hinge, I love to teach it with a stick. Like, how do you teach people how to hinge?
That's if they can clear any type of range of motion, that's how I do it. But, we talk a lot about progressive overload.
Right.
But there also, besides the progression part, we need to be ready, able, and capable to implement the regressive part.
Bingo.
So one of the things that I always make okay is like range of motion can be regressed. There's obviously, I'll tell people like, hey, dream, blue sky dream textbook, you're going chest to knee without a rounded back. Like, so I'll do mine. I'm like, I can go pretty low. You can't do that. And that's okay. So we stop it where our desired muscle group stops feeling the input, right? So that's
well phrased. Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody is hinging forward, as soon as they can't feel it in the hammies and they start to round, that's it.
Yeah.
So the stick is a great tool for that. One tool I also like to use if they can't maintain that extended, type of spinal posture, I do a lot of seated good mornings to get people into hinging.
Yeah.
Which I found is a really good way in, especially if somebody has lower body injuries or has that big, civilian fear of, if I hinge over, I'm blowing my back out and it's never coming back. It's like, well, no, because you don't hinge is why your back always bothers you.
So I do have a spinal injury. I have a grade 2 spondylolisthesis, and hinging has saved it. I've not had to have surgery because of it. And it's because I have to honor what my range of motion is and make sure the right muscles are activating. Yeah. But yeah, I didn't start doing
have
good
all
mornings.
That muscular support to make up for what your skeletons not doing. To put it simply, I guess.
the crackly part of the spine.
But yeah,
I didn't do a first good morning until I was in college, and we had to do. I only played water polo in college for 1 year, but in the weight room, that's where I was introduced to good mornings. And what a game changer to all of a sudden activate your hamstrings and whole posterior chain.
Yeah, I personally have had a few different herniated discs in my lumbar from football, and won't go into too many details for the coach's fault, but it's fine. Statute of limitations passed. We can't sue them anymore. Anyhow, so for the longest time, I love to deadlift. I love hinging, but whenever I'll hinge or deadlift specifically with decent enough frequency, even on warm-up weights, things would just start to go out of whack. I just couldn't hold the spinal form. So I've recently, in the past probably 14 months, almost exclusively done good mornings. My hamstrings are growing better than ever before. My gluteal measurements are great too, which some people appreciate. My wife appreciates.
Hey, that's part of programming hypertrophy.
Yeah, but it's funny because you would think that because the load is up on your spine, that the axial loading would fatigue me more. But I found with all my clientele, I've also started to transition to there. They have better outcomes because the bracing demand is so high to even keep a bar in place for a barbell good morning, that it becomes nearly impossible to not immediately find it when you fault, right? If the bar's up here and you round even a little bit, you go, oh crap.
You feel it, right?
Over. Whereas how many people have you seen hit a hard deadlift or stiff leg deadlift or Romanian deadlift set, and their back rounds out on rep 2, so they've technically faulted, which is, has its place.
Right.
But they spend so much time doing the rep with a technical fault, and they don't have their spinal erectors engaged. So the propensity for injury obviously goes up. It's a small percentage, but it's significant enough that can be avoided. So circling back to my initial thing, one of the ways I like to teach the hinge, use the stick to help them modify that extended back posture. So if they can't maintain spinal extension, I even have a little chin up, chest up to almost overextend to the upper back. If they can't maintain that, we go to seated, and I will start them off with a bit of a straddle stance, almost like a sumo stance over the bench on an incline bench, and I'll bring that bastard up to like 75 degrees. So
Nice.
they're gonna hinge from here to there. And I'm telling them, big belly, act like you're pregnant, put your belly button down first. If you can tap that pain-free, then we'll start moving you down. And it's in that bottom position, once they can do that pain-free, I'll have them hold. And I want them to imagine, don't sit up, don't lift your chest up. I want you to grab on, imagine where your butt attaches to your waistband, and that's now under tension because you've leaned forward. Squeeze where that butt attaches to your waistband and let that leverage you back. And then we start dropping to that, and before you know it, they can maintain that upper body position. Now we can go back to standing and start progressing their range of motion based off of what their hammies do. So that's how I normally progress through a hinge.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting too, because if the load's on the ground as opposed to something like a good morning, you have to fight all of these other just bad habits that people have developed over time. If a pencil's on the ground, you're just going to round and grab it. And there is a point for full spinal flexion. The spine is meant to do that, but it's not meant to under tremendous load.
Yeah, you shouldn't be overloading it with weight that's meant for another body part unless it's on purpose.
Right.
I always tell people that for the most part, there are no bad movements, right? They're just context. So
context, yes.
Contextually, I do Jefferson curls quite a bit.
I was just going to bring up Jefferson curls.
Yeah, but I'll Jefferson curl. I weigh 225 pounds. I've deadlifted over 500 before, not anymore, unfortunately. But I'll Jefferson curl like 95 pounds.
Okay.
Right? Because that's what I can maintain through full spinal flexion and extension without it. I overload that. But if I were to Jefferson curl what I deadlift, I would immediately be hospitalized, right? Because contextually, those tissues can't handle the load the other ones can. My nervous system can't regulate force production there. So that force is gonna be shunted off into my vertebrae, into my spine itself. Something's gonna go. My hamstring's gonna pop. So all movements, I always say all movements and all loading protocols are entirely contextual. For like a bench press, is it better for your growth to come all the way down with a slight pause? Yes, right. But if you have a shoulder impingement, and this is kind of leading back into the tricep dips, if you can't come past like 90 degrees without screaming shoulder pain, then let's stop there.
Right.
And, more often than not, your nervous system will adapt. If you can get to 90 without pain and you continually hit there, your nervous system will realize and downregulate and go, okay, well, we're safe here. You might gain 5 degrees of range of motion every couple of weeks, but after a year, all of a sudden you're bringing that bar all the way down. Then we can focus on the next thing.
Here's all of the awareness training that comes into it, because, we talk about movements and context. Mm-hmm. The way that everybody ticks is so unique and so individualized. And so the newest phrase I've heard is non-purposeful. A tick is a non-purposeful movement. And I've not heard that before, but I'm like, that's it. That's what makes sense. It's an elevated shoulder that's protracted and internally rotated. That's non-purposeful. And then at the same time that the other knee is twisting outward.
Yeah.
And so when you do these different lifts, programmable, the things that you get to learn about your joints and your body and how it's all connected, is so valuable. And within that process, whether you take that into CBIT therapy with a clinician, or whether you start to find that there is a decrease in tick frequency, intensity, or what's the other one? I usually have 3 categories: tick urge, intensity, or frequency. If it reduces any of those, you're learning something and finding a tool to help manage things.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and a bigger toolbox is always better, right? Like you don't need to use them all the time, but having the tools is going to be beneficial.
Totally. So how would you program, because you mentioned, not doing Jefferson curls at the same time that you're under a heavy load for a deadlift or RDL or something like that. How would you program those? Would you put those would like a Jefferson curl be in a maintenance program versus hinging in a strength or hypertrophy program? Like, how would you delineate where those go?
I contextually based off
Yeah.
the individual, but let's just say it's somebody who has spinal injuries. So, and they're trying to return to play. They've been lifting before.
Right.
So I would do a preparatory phase of good mornings on a separate training day from the Jefferson curls as a preparatory phase, keeping it really light. I always tell all my new clients that you have to get good before we can get heavy.
Yeah.
So I want to see you do a training session where we maintain spinal extension through our range of motion as big as we can get it. And I want to see you train your spinal flexion. Can you be good at both?
Right.
If you checked off yes and yes, obviously the criterion is going to be individually based as well. If you can check off yes and yes, then okay, let's move into a strength phase or a hypertrophy phase, depending on their goal. And then we can integrate that. And now if you want to deadlift off the ground, we can, because we know you can handle X amount of load in the flex position, X amount of load in the extended position. And the load we pick for that middle ground is going to be in the middle of those two, probably erring towards the lighter end of what you can hold in a Jefferson curl. And then we just very consistently and slowly progressive overload until you're hopefully moving well. And obviously things will always happen. Somebody could have a tweak, but that's the way I would progress it in order to kind of ensure as low a probability as possible of instance of injury.
Right. So it's funny. So I've done several certs throughout the years. I did the kettlebell strong first cert. The first cert I ever did was actually the Pilates apparatus cert. And that was, back in 2010. And several different certs throughout the year. But that's like quite the extreme to go from like hard style kettlebells to the fluidity of Pilates. But in Pilates, they do a lot of spinal sequencing, which kind of mimics the Jefferson curl. You go through a whole lot of, where you sequence from the top of your head and then curl down versus the tailbone up, where you're constantly moving that spine. There's a move, I think it's actually called short spine, where you're lying on the reformer with your feet in the straps and your feet go airborne. So you're almost doing like a candlestick with feet up in the air, and then you roll back down. It's basically an inverted Jefferson curl.
Nice.
Right? With the load coming from the feet pushing back down as opposed to, standing up with your hands on the load. But yeah, like the need for spinal sequencing and that fluidity is in a lot of different movement sequences, a lot of different movement disciplines, but what the body
definitely
is meant to do and how it handles load and rotation and movement and not rotation, I'm sorry, extension is what I meant to say. But
we can rotate too, that's
we can
also
rotate too. We need to rotate.
Look at this.
Right? There was actually a young guy I worked with a long time ago. There's been several, some common tics that have popped up that he would twist his hips and almost called it. There's actually been several different people I've seen with that one where they called it the Elvis tic, where you kind of pitch that way. But again, if we go back to programming, how do you program to not do something? Okay, well, let's look at what we do want to do. So if you have somebody who continually rotates their pelvis, let's say he's rotating to the left, we'd start bilaterally first, right? But you want to clean up that range of motion. Which hip doesn't have most optimal range of motion? How do you get that range of motion back? And then how do you teach those hips to hinge, right? What's working, what's not working? With a heavy rotation like that, probably wouldn't go into Jefferson right away, but definitely good mornings so that you can actually get equal activation, equal input on both sides.
Yeah.
Whether that makes tics go away, who knows? We have to go through this process to figure it out individually per person. But I can't imagine that giving these new patterns on a body, letting your nervous system activate and again, just get these new muscular patterns on the body won't make your body feel better.
Yeah.
Because I've seen statistics anywhere between 75 and 85% of us with tics have pain. So first and foremost, even if the tics keep coming back, how can we program and get you to move so that your body feels less pain?
Yeah. Or giving back any degree of control.
Right.
Right. because I feel like that is also, besides the physical pain, there is that like mental strain of like, I don't have control of what I'm doing right now. So to regain any of that
Completely.
is a very empowering feeling. Like just to
I'm
like,
choosing to move this way.
yeah.
I agree.
Speaking of the hinge in that type of scenario,
Yeah.
uh, I've been using this a lot as well. It's a progression, but I've been using it almost like a regressive progression. Is a
Okay.
B stance stiff leg deadlift.
What is that one?
So that was where you'll slide one foot back just about the foot's distance and be
Okay.
up on your toes with a bent leg. So ostensibly it's just a kickstand.
Okay. I was going to say like a tripod or kickstand.
Yeah. So instead
Okay.
of doing a single leg stiff leg where or RDL where you have the
Right.
balance component, the balance component is mitigated by the fact that the other leg is still on the ground.
Yeah.
And you can modify the weight by how much you push down. But because that leg is now no longer bearing the load, we can almost at least have the weight we're using, and now focus on, okay, how do I need to pivot into, for me specifically, my left glute in order to make that leg fire like the right one does,
Right.
and I can balance it back out. So it's a regression because we are pulling the load way down, right? If I have lower back considerations, 2 feet on the ground means my glutes have to compensate for both sides, and I might have a pelvic tilt or pelvic rotation to try to get into position. Whereas when it's just the one, I can now accommodate for each leg individually. So I'm almost regressing out of any type of like pain scenario or discomfort, but I'm progressing because technically it's a bit more complicated, right? It's a quasi single leg movement.
Right.
You can use that to kind of bridge the gap between both populations could use it. I really like that, and it does take a lot of, again, that lower back consideration out because the pelvis is now free to modify for each leg individually.
That makes sense. I've actually been doing a lot of single leg hinge and pelvic rotation work, and what a difference that has made on pain in the lower back. I don't have a hip twisting tic. As a kid, I used to have a lot of foot and knee tics. I don't really have those anymore. I still have a lot of breathing, like stomach clenching tics. But what a difference that has made, like different hip scrubs or airplanes where, like you're saying, with a single leg stance that you can actually let your pelvis modify and adjust and work through a range of motions so that you can eventually load that.
Yeah, and it becomes interesting when you realize like, oh, I didn't notice when I'm on 2 legs how different each leg fires. Like, one side you'll do the same exact load and everything. You're like, oh, my hamstring's destroyed. And on the other side, you're like, feel it in my glute, and that's it. And it's like, okay, well, what is the difference there to kind of, bridge that gap and bring them together towards they're functioning the same?
That makes sense. Yeah, I definitely like to train bilaterally first and then move unilaterally. But in the same token, if you have somebody with a really active asymmetrical body, everybody's asymmetrical. We all have these asymmetries and we're still functional. But when you have active asymmetries where you're ticking and doing that motion, that's a great thing to start with right away, that you can do that you can address that. And so that you can develop this proprioception between both sides of your body that you might not have realized how differently they operate.
Yeah, exactly. And then you use that, then you bring them back to bilateral, get them good. Then once they're good enough and they need a new challenge, bring them back to the thing that got them there, but now load it. And all of a sudden it's a progression and a regression.
Right. There's progressive overload over time while you're cleaning up those pathways to basically centrate your joints.
Yeah.
Have you heard the word joint centration?
I just now, about 5 seconds ago.
Okay, lovely. I learned it a couple years ago from a DNS certification, and the concept's been around. That was just the first time I had heard of it. But the idea that there's equal muscular tension around a joint. And when we tick, especially with shoulders or hips, let's keep with this hip rotation tick, where if we're rotating in one direction, your actual femur, the ball and socket, is not centrated. One side might be anteriorly and medially pulled while the other one is posteriorly laterally pulled. So neither of those hip joints are centrated. So how do you centrate this joint? And that becomes, what exercise modifications do you do with a single leg, kickstand here? All of a sudden you can cue it to centrate it. If you have equal footing where you're pressing through your big toe and you look at the spirals through the leg, and all of a sudden that hip now can actually sit with equal tension around it because of external cueing that you've given it. and now internal awareness that you've developed with how your body moves. What does that do for tics? It's an open-ended question. Nobody knows. Maybe anybody with an exercise lab can work on that for us. But
Yeah, do some studies for us. Damn, come on.
Yes, there's a lot to be studied here.
Yeah.
But what happens when you centrate a joint? What does that do for tic urge? That's my biggest question. Like with any of your tics, kind of diverting from our hinge topic here, like, do you have anything or exercises or movements that you do that you have found improve your tics?
Yes, and unfortunately, they're the ones that I get the chance to do the least. I have like a boxer's neck harness.
Okay.
For loading. I have a head extension, cervical extension tic that is pretty frequent. And whenever I have the chance to regularly train flexion and extension, I'll go lateral both ways and rotation. I
Yeah.
feel the best.
Really interesting. So
And
wait, you go flexion, extension, and rotation.
and I do lateral flexions.
And lateral. So you're
And that's when I feel the
centrating
best.
you're centrating your
I was
neck.
just gonna say that. It's funny. I hadn't heard much of that concept, and it's exactly what makes it feel the best. And when I don't, that urge is higher, and it creeps down into like my mid trap
Yeah.
as well, where it's just that tension from constant use. But when I get a chance to, it's hard to do in public too, because you're like, I'm gonna put this harness on and take a bunch of
Right.
weights and do
Excuse
some
me while
training.
I strap this to my head. And yeah.
Yeah, even at home, my wife will come in and I'm doing that at the end of one of my training sessions. She's like,
You're not doing it right there.
I'm gonna go back. You do this one in private, okay, bud? I'm like, yeah, okay, sweetie. But yeah, so that is actually an exercise I like to use. And there are body weight variations that work totally well, which is I need to load a little bit more because of the strength considerations of the other muscle groups.
Again, to centrate, if you're just doing body weight on that, that's not going to centrate you and the rest of your musculature.
Yeah.
You do kind of have to match what your body is capable of doing, safely. And obviously, a lot about anatomy to do all of that. But yeah, I find it interesting that you do all ranges of motions, and you have to do all ranges for it to improve.
Yeah. It's like, I know people will often recommend just a chin tuck.
Right.
But it's like, okay, if we thought about this as the way we would program any other load-bearing exercise, what is the active range of motion of the muscle groups we're trying to train if we're standing up and doing a chin tuck?
Right.
How much force are we actually producing? Because gravity's pulling my chin down, right? So that's not muscular action. Going backward, I guess, is a little bit, but there's not very much actual active time under tension on the muscle group that you're supposedly working.
Right.
But if I were to lie supine on the edge of a bench with my head off, I could go full extension and flexion. Then from here, I could chin tuck. And now I'm actually working that muscle under its length and tension, right? Taking it to a full range of motion. I'm also improving the range of motion of every direction because I'm like, again, standing up, I'll get a little tension here, and then there's none. If I'm lying on my side and if I'm loaded, I can get tension all the way into there. The weight's going to pull me into a nice deep stretch, and it's still loaded all the way up to the top because it has a little pivot point on it. But that actually actively trains those muscles, not only to improve the sensations, but I'm getting hypertrophy out of them. They are recruiting more motor units, so I have more control of what each area is doing and centrating it. Look what I did there.
Bring it back.
So that's how I program that. So for all of them, I lie in a position or will load it in a position that the load actually resists the muscle along a strength curve. Like, wow, who'd have thought? Right. For a long time, I tried chin tucks and I was like, I get no relief whatsoever. I mean, it is one of those competing responses I can do anywhere pretty easily.
Right.
But it doesn't help the way that actually getting in and training it through the full range of motion does. That's actually on the docket for the end of today's pool session, so it should be nice.
Hey, nice.
It's a gift and a curse because you get a crazy neck pump.
Yeah.
You end up looking like 17-year-old Mike Tyson. It's like this, but it feels good afterward. But for a little bit, you're Batman. Michael Keaton is Batman until the muscle pump comes down. Yeah. Until the muscle pump comes down.
But it's interesting too because what else does that feed into? Are there others? What if somebody who is untrained. They're just kind of exploring weightlifting for the first time. They're in their mid-20s. Maybe they used to do athletics as a kid, stop working out. A lot of people in their 20s and 30s, when tics might go away or they might still stay persistent, they're in the workforce. They're not working out as much. They're trying to come back into working out. So if we're doing all of these different neck positions, but it's not feeding into the rest of the kinetic chain. So, I mean, your neck can go anteriorly, posteriorly. It goes everywhere. There's a ton going on with the neck. But that being said, a lot of times with head tics I've seen, there's shoulder elevation too. And it's not equal. There's one shoulder that goes forward, one shoulder that goes higher and up. What would the benefit be to training the lats first, getting the shoulders to depress, to do all of this neck work with a shoulder depression?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a max shoulder depression too. There's degrees of contraction of the muscle. You don't have to go full hard style and brace everything. But, in training all of that too, because I find it very interesting. The more I get into some of the breath work stuff and the deep core work, that if somebody is like a chesty breather, where they're up in through their thoracic, it's also working their neck. If they don't have good ability to access their core and understand like how their core's piston system works, it's going to the neck. So there's this overuse of the neck because their core's not firing. There's this overuse of the neck because of how they're ticking. It's just interesting to see, do we centrate the neck first? And does that allow them to access their abdominals better? Or do you hit the abdominals first? Or do we have to do all of it all the time? Which is kind of the answer.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would
right, you got to do all of it all the
depending
time.
on what you want to prioritize, just put that first in the program, but get to it all.
Right.
And I think in this hypothetical workforce individual situation,
Yes,
they're not looking for specialization of any muscle group or any performance metric, right? So you could
fair.
start the day, you warm up with your next centration exercises. While you're there, perfect spot, right? You're already hanging off a bench, grab a light dumbbell, and let's do some lat pullovers.
Yeah.
Right. So we're getting our scapula elevated. And as we're doing that, we have to depress them and pull over. And you're like, oh, wow, I'm actually gaining some scapular awareness of what's happening there. I'm getting a little lat activation. Oh, simultaneously, I don't have to go anywhere. Now in 8 minutes, you've done 2 working sets for each and you're done. Move on.
Right.
And then from there, oh, you're already lying on your bench. Let's put our knees up and go into like a dead bug and do some breath work. So now in a 10-minute span, you've done all that. And you can move on to hitting the other compound movements and still be out in 40 minutes.
Boom. Look at that. See, expert programmer. But
I'm just bad at dealing with excuses.
So, it's true, right?
I mean, you've had plenty of people that deal with that. They're like, oh, I can't because of this. I'm like, you could do it. That you absolutely anything that matters to you, you can get done. Like if it actually matters, you can find some amount of time.
Right. And it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be perfect.
It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a full hour, 20, 30 minutes of doing something. There's a great graphic of what people think consistency looks like versus what it actually looks like. Everybody thinks they used circles. So it was like 10 circles and all of them were perfectly filled in. And that's what we think consistency looks like. But it doesn't. It's all the circles filled in. Sometimes they're filled in all the way. Sometimes they're halfway filled in. Sometimes they're 3/4 filled in. But it is the continuation of doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like what we talked about with this stuff to begin with. It's like starting is just doing it is more important than doing it absolutely 100%. They talk about that in entertainment too, with like screenwriting. The best way to write a really good movie is to write a shitty one and start editing. You have to do it, right?
Yeah, the iterations of something, right? That is the process for everything that everybody talks about, and the improvement. It's the continuation.
It's funny. I'm going to quote Ben Affleck here. It's a weird guy to quote. But Matt Damon talked about this when they wrote Good Will Hunting, and they've done plenty of projects together. They are Oscar-winning writers. But he said, don't judge me off my best ideas, not my worst ones. So it's like, I'm going to give you everything. we're going to try. We're going to iterate. Judge me off how good my good ones are, not how bad the bad ones are.
Right.
When you find you're good, you got to be willing to just do it all.
You find you're good. Isn't that the truth? You do. You find you're good by just trying it all, which is also why like trying different exercise and movement systems, maybe Pilates does work for some. For me, I would find that actually did increase my tics. I love the fluidity of it. I love that I could connect to my core in a deeper way for the first time, but it is very cervical flexion based, all of the different movements. And I did find that increased that a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden I was aware of how my transverse abdominis and neck muscles engaged. But for me, kettlebells worked significantly better in tic management, strength training, and just overall how my body likes to move. But you have to try different things. Maybe for some people it's animal flow. For some people it's high intensity work. Maybe some people it is traditional strength training. But you actually came with me to, there's a camp near us for kids with Tourette's, and you came to help me one year, and it was so great. And gosh, these kids, they're all movers. Some of them are hesitant to move because they've not had many opportunities to move in the movements that they want to. It can be scary at times, especially if you go many years without getting a diagnosis and knowing that you're dealing with Tourette syndrome or a tic disorder. But when you give movements to these kids that all of a sudden do work those competing response muscles, it's so cool to see them light up. But what I learned on that trip with you, and you were great about this too, because we had 2 different age groups that we worked with. And the older age group, this is actually where I understood Jeremy Frisch's whole perspective that how you have to train youth athletics and youth development, it's through games. You have to just get them moving. Like to your point and your quote there, like you'll find you're good, but you have to just get moving first. We don't need to give a watered down adult version to the 7 to 11-year-olds. And I showed up with 2 different choices. I'm like, I don't know how it's going to go with the younger group. I have no idea. And sure enough, that's when I found that didn't work. They need games, they need movement. And you had so many in your back pocket, which was awesome. You're like, let's have them do this. Let's have them do this. And it worked for them. It was great. But yeah, right.
You have to show up and be full-time. I've always been able to show up and just be fun uncle.
fun uncle energy. With a movement background. That's the best kind, right? But
getting out there and that fun makes it. I always tell people that too when they ask like, oh, I love this at parties. I'm sure you get this too. People are like, oh, you're a trainer. What should I do to get in shape?
Right.
I'm like, oh man, I'm a trainer for money.
Right.
But the answer is almost always the thing you'll do. It's like you said, do you love kettlebells? I don't. That's awesome. If you love them, do it. They'll give you great results if you do them all the time.
The thing that works yoga? Is the thing that works.
Yes, the consistency. What is the thing that you will do?
Right.
Like, is there an optimal way to diet and exercise to look exactly how you want? Yeah.
It's what you're gonna do.
Yeah. But like there's a scientifically proven best way to do that. And that's beyond all the steroids and the diet that bodybuilders are on, because they are the absolute best in the world at looking exactly how they want to look.
Right.
Will normal people do that? No. So that's not the answer. Like, don't become a professional bodybuilder because you want to look good for the beach.
Right.
Find the thing you'll do 3 to 6 days a week, and find the foods you can eat in a moderation, in a slight caloric deficit if you're trying to lose weight, 7 days a week, and then just stick with that. That's really the answer. That's why I always try to tell people, like, it's not. It can be as complicated as you want. It also can be as simple as you want. Like, if you're willing to, whatever you're willing and able to honestly, consistently give an effort to, is the best thing you'll do.
Right. And beyond 2 weeks, beyond a month,
exactly.
Like what can you do for 6 months plus? Because once you're doing it for that long, you will continue to do it.
Yeah. And then when I tell them that, they always go, okay, but like, should I do sit-ups?
Okay, that sounds great. But I've really been reading up on this cleanse. And if I lift too heavy, I'm gonna get really big.
Oh yeah. I love that. I always tell, I had someone say this in the middle of a session the other day. He was like, I don't know if I want to do this last set. I'm worried my arms will get too big. And I said, what, when that becomes a problem, I don't care time of day. It could be 2:00 in the morning. You call me and you tell me when your arms are too big.
Right.
He's
Like,
like,
I don't, again, it's just a lack of understanding of physiology and how hard it is to grow and build and the active work it takes to put into that.
Every 17-year-old will have 22-inch biceps if it just happened by accident.
Right. Just by accident. You would live on 5x5 and
Yeah.
things would just magically.
The other thing I remind people often is like, okay, so this is you now, and this is too big. You can't go like this. You have to go like this. So somewhere along the line between you now and too big or too fit, well, guess what? You had to hit how far you wanted to go. Then we just hit maintenance volume.
That's true. And then
I promise somewhere between where you are now and way better than you want to be, you'll have gotten as good as you wanted. So we'll just keep going.
That is a great perspective. I've never said that. Like, you'll stop before all of a sudden you're hulking up.
Yeah. Like if you're bench pressing and you're like, I don't want to bench press 500 pounds. Like, good news, you can't. And before you get somewhere between now and then, you'll have hit your peak ideal weight for bench pressing, and we won't go any harder.
Right.
It's that simple.
That's what you enjoy doing. That's what you'll continue to do. That's what you'll like that the results have given you. And then, when you apply that to the Tourette community too, there's that extra element of, okay, well, what does it do for your tics? Are you noticing any reduction in urge intensity or frequency? Mm-hmm. No, we can change course and change different, right? Because the thing that works is the thing that works.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you are hating every step of it, then maybe we can readjust the approach.
Right? You still have to be a participant and enjoy the process.
Yeah.
Of course, there's always a learning curve. Nobody likes to do things that they're not good at.
Yeah.
But if you're in it for the long haul, there's a light switch that happens at some point. Either whether I call it an inlet, especially when it comes to tics, that moment that you feel like an activation of a muscle. Let's say you feel your lat engaged for the first time and that becomes a competing response, or that is along the line of an antagonistic movement to a tic that you've never felt before. That antagonistic movement, that's the inlet. That's something that's practicable now. And that drives people.
Yeah.
Right. It's a new feeling that you can't describe to somebody unless you actually feel it, unless you get that input.
Yeah.
But that's,
even more than enjoyment, like you said, you find your inlet and you just find what's the thing you can tolerate and subsist on consistently. Like, just got to get it going.
Just get it going. I like to use a gear analogy. Like, okay, we've all seen gears, how they all fold together and work together. You have to work the pieces first and find what those are. And that's going to be different for everybody. Maybe you already have one whole gear done. You've been in the weight room for many years, but now we've got to piece together some other things of injury, tic consideration, do lifestyle, whatever it is. And then once you hit all those pieces, then the gears start going and then they can go faster and harder and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Do it. I'm already taking 2 of yours.
Writing it down.
But it's like, we don't even have to get into tricep dips because we've already covered the same ideas of what I wanted to get to. So like a tricep dip being that it does place a huge anterior stress on the shoulder. And if that's your tic, that you protract your shoulder and you have anterior pain in the front of your shoulder, a tricep dip, an anterior load would not be the first thing to do.
Yeah.
But how would you get from anterior pain in the shoulder from a tic to successfully doing a tricep dip? And honestly, we kind of covered it, that you have to centrate the joints. You have to take a step back. You have to do progression, regression, progressive overload, centrating that shoulder joint, activating, finding all of these other muscles in your back with cueing along the whole chain that muscle's working to build up to that movement.
Yeah, exactly.
But awesome.
And along the way, you make all these beautiful little discoveries and get good at so many different things you didn't know you even cared about being good at. And
true.
The joy comes in. You're like, I didn't know I wanted to be good at pullovers.
Right. There's a satisfaction that happens. And
yeah, that's one of the beautiful things in working with people, when they're committed to their goal and you're like, they wanted this, but along the way, they found all these weird little things that they can now hang their hat on. You're like, dude, this is awesome. Like,
I couldn't agree more. Like, I totally light up with all of that too. I think that's like where we're very lucky that we found the profession that, is purposeful and drives us, because there's no better feeling. Truly, to see
Yeah.
somebody find that and discover that about themselves because they've worked for it.
Yeah, exactly. Just every little milestone. I always tell people that too. It's like, so I'm here with you to celebrate every little victory. If
Yeah.
it's a 1 pound or 1 rep PR, or, 1 pound on the bar, or just you didn't think you'd finish a month and we did a month. Like
Yeah.
every little victory, they're all worth celebrating.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. It's always a step in the right direction. But Ron, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I feel like we could always just keep going. Let's talk more movements. Maybe you're the first trainer I've had on here, and we'll have you be our frequent repeater. But
I'm ready to come back whenever you need me.
Awesome. But Ron, where can people find you? Where?
You can find me on Instagram to stay up to date with my acting stuff, and I post training stuff on there at RG_Trujillo, TRUJILLO, and follow my acting career on IMDb. And I go by my full name, which is Ronald Gonzales-Trujillo, because it's important to me to use my full name.
Awesome. Ronald, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Let's talk again soon, but I'll see you at the gym before then.
Yes. See you soon. All right. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ron.
We love providing a platform for sharing ideas about living with Tourette syndrome and other tic disorders. While we strive to keep the content evidence-based, please understand that exercise science, information about Tourette syndrome, and its co-occurring conditions are constantly evolving. The content shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. By listening to this podcast, you agree to not use the information as a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment for yourself or your child. As always, consult your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions or starting any treatments related to Tourette syndrome or other health conditions, which also includes mental health. This disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast. TicFit and the podcast team do not take any responsibility for any actions taken based on the information provided. Our goal is to educate, support, and raise awareness, not to diagnose or treat any medical condition. Thanks for listening.